Hey, welcome to Tabletop Skirmish Games. I'm Lee, and in this video I'll show you how I painted the SLAUGHTERSHADE with Shadow Whip for the Khainite Shadowstalkers. Here's our SLAUGHTERSHADE with Shadow Whip, all built and primed. And for the primer, I used the Wraithbone by Citadel, and this is a contrast undercoat. And so I gave that a really good coating all over the model with a nice even coat. The brush I'll be using for this tutorial will mostly be the Army Painter character brush. And in the video I'll mostly be using contrast paints, but I'll also be using some Vallejo paints and Games Workshop base paints as well. I'll be painting my miniature separate to the base, and so I want to get something fixed to it so that I can use the miniature holder here. To do this, I'm using a great tip from Bjorn Kuma 8877, who left a comment on one of my previous videos to let someone know how they could fix their miniature to some kind of base for this purpose. And this is the first time I've tried it, and after painting a couple of miniatures now since then with this technique, it's worked really well and I can highly recommend it. So you can see here I've just got some sprue. I've cut it to the width of the feet there and then just trimmed off all the bumpy bits. We don't want those. We just want a nice smooth bit of sprue that's the same width as the feet. And I'm just checking it here and measuring it up just to make sure that's going to be accurate and we're going to be able to stick it down. And then I take some Gorilla super glue. This is my favourite type of super glue. I've used this for loads of stuff in the past. And I just put a couple of little dots on the feet there. Not too much. It's really strong. It sets really quick as well. And then I just offer it up and place it on top with a little press. And you can see it's already taken just in that short time. But just to make sure, I give it a firm push together. Hold it for a few seconds there. And then I'm going to leave that alone to set before putting it into the miniature holder. And now that's set. It's been a few minutes. I can just pop it in. And it's so strong, it'll hold it in place, no problem. And there you can see that's going to hold it nice and strong, ready for our painting. I even give it a little wiggle in a second, just to make sure it doesn't come out. But you can see it's really strong. There you go, nice and strong. So thanks so much Bjorn Kuma 8877 for an awesome tip. Now we're ready to get painting, and the first colour is the Contrast Black Templar. And this is going to be for the boots and those gloves as well. And this Black Templar is great, just one coat over this base colour, and that's going to give us a really nice black leather look. And I put it on quite thick and then just spread it around, making sure I start where I want a lot of the paint to end up in the kind of recesses, and also try and end my brush stroke in the recesses and the creases, and that's where most of the paint is going to gather. So I just find it's where you put the brush on first of all when it's got the most paint, and where you end it as you're guiding the paint along. Just try and end it in a crease or a fold of the material, and that's going to leave a really nice shadow. If it starts to pool on the more raised areas where you want it to be a bit more of a highlight, then just use your brush and just guide that paint away. And if it's still too much, you can just dry your brush off and then wick up some of that paint too. While that's drying, we're going to take some contrast Basilicarnum grey, and this is going to be for the trousers. There's not too much here that you can see, certainly from the front. And on some of the previous models for the Khainite Shadowstalkers, I just carried on using the black, but I just found it was almost too much. So using this Basilicarnum grey alongside the black boots is just a nice little contrast, and it just gives us an extra colour and kind of breaks it up a little bit more. And then round the back as well, we just cover all those leggings there. And then this is going to dry kind of like a not too dark, not too light either, just somewhere in between, and it's going to work really nicely against that black. And just like our black contrast paint, quite liberal amount here, I'm putting quite a bit on, and then just guiding it where I want it into all the nooks and crannies, just being careful not to overlap any of the other areas. One of my favourite paints now, the Contrast Snakebite Leather. This is a great paint, one coat of this, it just looks really good for a leather effect. And again, just putting it straight on, straight out the pot with one nice generous coat. But I'm not loading the brush up too much as I'm taking my time so I don't go over the piece of cloth that's hanging down there. But I still want to get enough that we're going to get some nice dark, rich shadows in the recess areas. And again, just starting in the areas where I want most of the shadow to be and trying to end my brush stroke, again, where I want that paint to pool and give a nice recess. On some of the previous miniatures from the Khainite Shadowstalkers, I used a different brown for the leather just to make it a bit darker, but I just found it wasn't as good as the snakebite leather, so I've gone back to using it here for this miniature, and I think I prefer it a lot. It just gives a really nice balance between highlight and shadow. So yeah, definitely recommend this for any kind of leather on the models, and I think against the other paints it works really nice. These Khainite Shadowstalkers are so fiddly. They're so like fine, and lots of, with the cloaks and the different weapons, there's lots of pieces, so I'm being really careful and taking my time to get in there and remembering to pick out details like the strap of the kind of whip there, the handle, and giving that a coat too. Okay, now we're on to the Terradon Turquoise, another contrast paint and another one of my favourites. I love this colour and it's such a rich paint. It goes on really nicely. Start painting here and the lid pops down, and I saw this great tip on Guerrilla Miniature Gaming video that I was watching, and he said to use a lid or protective lid from a paintbrush just to hold the paint pot open, and it works really well. So there we go, another cool tip. And here we are, now I'm putting this on, and again with this it's going on really thick, and sorry, the kind of whip is just covering the bit I'm painting there so you can't see it, but I'm putting it on nice and thick and really working it into the shadows and the folds of that material, and trying not to put as much on when I get to the edges and the more raised areas where I want a real nice highlight. You'll see this Terradon Turquoise working really well on the cloaks when I put up the other videos for the Khainite Shadowstalkers that I've painted, and it does give a really nice highlight on the dark cloaks. And there we go, that's the front and the back there, all covered. And I'm also going over these little pouches and giving those that nice turquoise colour, and that's another little contrast of colours there just to break up the greys and browns of the leather and the trouser material. So I'm not being adventurous with my colour scheme here, I'm just going with the pictures that came with the Warcry Catacomb set where I got the Khainite Shadowstalkers, and literally copying those pictures and colours. So now I'm moving on to the whip, and I've taken some contrast Magus Purple and contrast Black Templar, and I'm going to kind of try and do a wet blend here and see what effect I can get. So I start with the black, and I'm putting that on at the base of the whip near the handle. I'm just leaving that little bit you can see there at the bottom, which is going to be gold later on, so I'm just avoiding that, and I'm putting on a pretty thick coat of the black there and giving that a good coating. And before that dries, I'm going to move straight on to the purple, and then we're going to mix it on the actual miniature and see if we can get the two colours to kind of go from black to purple in a nice fade. So here we go, here's the purple now, and just like mixing quite a bit of it together there with the black, going back to the black again where it meets, spreading that round. So there we've got like a mid-tone, and now we're going on to more of the purple. This didn't come out as dark as I hoped, and I've changed the colour for the next miniatures that I do, because this purple is just too pale, and you can see right through a lot of it, and it doesn't cover it very dark, so I don't think that really worked. On the next miniatures and the next videos I'll be putting on, especially with the big cloaks that have got a lot of purple in, I'll be using the Shyish Purple contrast paint, and that works a lot better. It's a lot richer, a lot darker, and I do a kind of blend with the turquoise, which works really well with that Shyish Purple. Okay, this colour's great. It's called Volupus Pink, and it's so vibrant, and it's a great colour to use. And I wanted to do the hair a completely different colour to the cloaks and everything, and I thought the pink would work really well against the purple. It keeps it in theme, and this is the only kind of area where I really deviated from the colour scheme that comes with the Warcry Catacombs box. And on the hair here, there's lots of gold bands running down, as you can see it all bunched up. And as I first started to paint, I was being really careful with this Volupus Pink and trying to leave the gold without going over it at all, so I could then paint straight on it with the gold. But I was just not careful enough. So in the end, I just went over it all, and I thought I'd go and tidy it up later on. I thought that would be a better way of doing it. I think this is where the contrast paints for such fine detail work like this, they're not so good, and it's often better to just go over it in contrast paint and then touch it up with a base paint and then go back with another colour later on. So while that's drying, I found some lead Belcher base paint, and that's going to go on all the silver parts. On some models before, I've painted them all silver, even the gold bits, and then gone over with a contrast paint. But here, I want the gold on these to be really like bright. So I'm sticking with lead Belcher for the silver weapons, and then I'm going to use a gold paint later on for the gold sections. And here we are, I'm just giving it all a complete coat, and you can wet this down if you like. I didn't, I just used it from the pot, and I found one coat did the trick then for me. But if you want to thin it down, do a couple of coats. I think a lot of people do that. It's all up to you really. And then not forgetting all the other blades. This one's got like 3 or 4 blades and a sword, so there's lots going on here. And just taking my time, make sure I didn't miss any little bits out. You can see all the little spikes that are coming out of the end of the hair as well, but they're going to be gold, so I left those alone and just carried on with the blades here. And this lead Belcher is going to give us a nice base for all our silver metal work. While the lead Belcher is open, I thought I'd just do this little bit of metal framework here that's attached as part of the base, and gave that a complete coat of lead Belcher. For the gold bits and for the bright gold, I've gone for a Vallejo 0.996 gold, and this is going to be for the mask, the handle of the weapon, and the other areas where there's little bits of gold, like the spikes in the hair, and the handle of the whip has also got a little bit as well. And this gold's really good because it's really bright, and I kind of think it suits the Khainite Shadowstalkers. I kind of imagine them not all grungy, but rather more like pristine and a bit sparkly. So I didn't want it to do like an effect that would dirty that gold up, and especially for that mask, I really wanted it to kind of stand out, and imagined something like that just emerging from the shadows, really bright and shiny, would be pretty trippy, and I think it would suit the warband really well. So there's quite a lot of gold on this model, and I've done the little bracelet there, the handle of the sword, the whip, and now I'm doing these little metal pieces here which are gold. And next I'll move on to the mask. And this mask is great. It's got that huge tongue just sticking out, and I imagine it's all part of the mask, so I'm going to paint the tongue and the mask gold. This is all really cool, and this will be a nice bright base coat for this paint and give us a really nice bright gold that I think will work really nicely. Now I'm on to these really fiddly bits around the hair, and I was really taking my time. I moved on to a smaller brush here. I've just got quite a small brush. I just found it easier to get in, and I got a nice point to the brush by rolling it through the paint and twisting it as I loaded it with paint. And then I'm just making sure it's coated, but you can see there they're so small, and there's loads of them. And then next I moved on to the Rakath flesh and Ceramide white base, and then these are base paints that I've mixed together, equal parts, so 1 part Rakath flesh, 1 part white, and here I'm just rolling the brush through the paint just to get a nice tip, and you can see that works really well. So this mix now, I'm going to apply it to all the flesh areas, and this is just going to cover up any little areas where I've made a mistake and gone over it. You can see there's a little bit of black there underneath where I put the too much paint up there earlier on, so I'm just going to cover that up. And this is just base coat, tiny bit of water just to thin it a little, and I'm trying to get away with 1 coat here, and it usually does a good enough job to cover the contrast paints I found, so that's really good. And I'm just giving it all a coat. On the back here I haven't really made any mistakes, but I want it all to be the same colour, and I don't have any necrotic flesh base coat, so I'm changing the colour a little bit by using this Rakath flesh. But I'm leaving it where the kind of deeper, darker bits are. I'm kind of leaving that and not trying to go into that with this paint. So I'm just almost going over the most raised areas or anywhere where I've made a mistake. So at this stage, that's all the base layers done now, and that looks really cool. I think the colours work nicely. It's bright, it's vibrant, and they're going to be a nice contrast against the Signs of the Flame that also come with Catacombs. I think this miniature also stands out a lot from the other Khainite Shadowstalkers, just because they're a lot darker. Right, now we're on to Agorist Dunes, and this is going to be a brilliant colour to put over that gold, and we're going to keep the vibrancy of the gold paint, but this is just going to give us some shadow and shade and make those details really pop out. I love using the contrast paints over metallic paint. I think they work really well, and you really get some nice effects from it. I remember doing the Catacombs terrain when I did the weapon stash. All the different coloured swords and shields are all done like this. I did like a base coat of lead Belcher, and then went over it with the different colours. And if you use this Agarus Dunes over Lead Belcher, you get a really nice gold effect too. But again, I wanted this to be a lot brighter, so I did it with a gold base paint instead. But there we go, you can see that's given it some shade now. And here I'm putting some on the other gold bits as well. It really transforms it. And you could use Agrax Earthshade for this for sure, but I just really like this Agarus Dunes because it just gives it a more richer gold shading, I think. One thing I found I had to be really careful was when I was putting this over the bits that went up against other materials and other colours. You just have to be really careful because that Agarus Dunes, although it works well as a shade for gold, it doesn't work as a shade for other colours, and it almost leaves a yellow trace behind, so just be careful of that. Now we're going to take some Contrast Medium and Contrast Guilliman Flesh, and we're mixing 3 parts Contrast Medium to 1 part Guilliman Flesh, and this is going to be used to give a shade over all the flesh areas. And this I'm putting on quite gentle, I'm not putting too much, and I'm starting and ending my brush strokes where I want the most paint to be. And you can see I'm just using my finger to rub it off the more raised areas. And I want this to be quite subtle. I want the skin to be real pale and just to represent the kind of warband and a little bit of the narrative of them. So keeping that as pale as I can with the paints I have, so I don't have any other kind of flesh tones for this. But if you can recommend a colour that you think is good for these kind of elves, that'd be great if you could let me know, and maybe I can pick that up later. I'm happy how it turned out in the end, but it could certainly be better. And I think just having the kind of a paler tone with more like a bit more shadow to it though would work really nice. So yeah, that'd be great. If you know, please let me know in the comments below. Next we're going to take some Nuln Oil, and this is going to be for all the metallic weapons that we want to keep silver, and this is just going to kind of break that single colour up and give us some nice shade and just some texture on there too. And you could use some, maybe the black or the Basilicarnum grey contrast paints instead of the Nuln Oil, but I like the Nuln Oil against this Lead Belcher. I think that works nicely. Certainly for this kind of effect here, I want the weapon to be a bit shinier, so that works really good. I'm also applying this Nuln Oil to the pink hair as well, just to give us some nice deep rich shadows. And I found on some of the other models you can put it a bit the pink on a bit thicker as well, and that works really nicely. But I wanted this model to be a bit brighter than them, as if she's away from the shadows now and she's come out and there's almost some kind of light, maybe some fire from the signs of the flame reflecting on her. So she's definitely brighter. But you'll see later on with some of the other models, they're going to have a lot darker hair. But here we are, so I put a nice even coat all over, but a little bit extra underneath, just to kind of show where those shadows are going to be the most. I also thought it'd be cool just to put a little bit over the turquoise cloak at the back, and I put it all over the back there because that's heavily in shadow. And I also put a little bit at the front, mainly at the top where it meets the leather belt and working down. So I loaded the brush up, put quite a bit on here, and then just dragged it down and dragged it into those kind of creases and recesses, because that's where I want most of that shadow to come. And then I cleaned the brush off and just gently wiped over the highlighted areas so there would be hardly any shade at all there, and then that would really give us a nice contrast. While all those shades were drying, I took some Gryph-hound Orange, and this is a little rust effect for the metal, the twisted metal work. So I'm just dabbing that on where the different metals are overlapping and where I thought the rust would build up the most, like on the edges, certainly where it meets the ground, that kind of thing. And you notice I haven't painted the little bumpy ground bit at the bottom there because I'm going to cut that off later, and then as I fix it to the base. Okay, now I've gone back to that base white and Rakath flesh mix, and I'm just going to touch up some of the areas of the flesh where there's a little bit too much shadow and I want it to be a bit paler and a bit brighter. So I'm just looking for the raised areas of muscles and just putting a tiny bit at a time on, and just trying not to take away the shade from the recesses, but just make those kind of raised muscles and areas where it's going to get the most highlight, just make those stand out a little bit. I think if I got the base flesh colour and then a contrast or a shade that best suited these. I probably wouldn't have to do this stage, but I just felt for this model, just that extra little bit of highlight would bring it to life a little bit. Now I'm taking the brightest silver I've got, which is Vallejo 0.997, and this is just going to be an edge highlight on the silver blades. And again, in the past I've used the silver highlight on gold to bring it out, but I'm not doing that here. I'm just going to use it on the silver, and I'm loading the brush up, but it's not like thick with paint, it's just well coated, and I'm using the side of the brush and dragging it along the areas where I want a kind of highlight, just to show that weapon is sharp, and along the edge of the blades and everything like that. And then I'm going over those kind of like blades that she carries on the side of her there, and just making sure I get all the blades at the end of the hair, the end of the whip, and all those areas. And I'm trying to put on quite a bit of this highlight. I still think I could do a little bit more, but yeah, I really want a nice bright highlight for this silver. Now everything's pretty dry, I went back to the Agarus Dunes, and I just felt once it had dried, that musk didn't have enough in the shadows there, so I'm going back with that contrast paint and just putting little dabs of paint where I want it to be a bit richer, a bit darker. So I'm good in the eye sockets, in the mouth, in the groove of the tongue, and also on the top there with the patterns. So I'm keeping the raised areas highlighted as much as possible, but just adding a little bit extra into those deeper, darker recesses. I think these paints are great for the standard I'm going for, a tabletop battle ready standard, and just with some little touches like this you can just add a little bit more detail, and it's nice to do, but you really don't have to. It's fine with just one coat. And there we go. I think that looks a lot richer now, a lot better. And back to the Nuln Oil, and now I'm going to go over the just little bit of metal here where it needs a little bit more shade in the recesses, and where the metals overlap it's good to have that little bit of shade going on, and this works great for that. Now I'm back again to that mix of Rakath flesh and Ceramide white, and I want to give this hair a little bit of highlight just on the tops, just to bring it out a little bit. So I get this old scruffy brush, load it up with paint, wipe most of it away on a kitchen towel, and just test it on my hand there. And I'm going to be really gentle now and just put a little bit on the top of the hair and just go against the grain of the hair. So I don't want to get any of this in the recesses and take away that shade I put on. I just want it to be a highlight on the very uppermost sections of the hair. I think this just brought it to life a little bit more, and it really did need, although this contrast paints, it really did need a little bit extra highlight. On some of the other miniatures from this warband, I've experimented with an undercoat and a zenithal shade and doing some shadow as well before I put the contrast paints on, but for this miniature I've just stuck with that army painter necrotic flesh because again she's going to be brighter. And here we are with that same mix of Rakath flesh and white. I'm just giving a tiny highlight to those little like knobbly bits there on the top of the boots and also on the glove, and so I'm just catching those with a tiny bit of paint just to bring them out a little bit more too. And I left it there. I didn't want to keep going doing little bits of highlight. I didn't want to overdo it. The whole point of these contrast paints was to make this quite a fast process and enjoyable and get it tabletop ready. Okay, so now we're ready to base this miniature, and I'll just quickly show you how I get rid of that sprue from the bottom of the feet there, how we get that off, and then how I attach it to a base that's already been painted. So first of all, I just tried with some pliers, and I just pulled it away from one of the feet here. Sorry, it's got a little bit blurry, but it clears up in a second. So I just pull it away from the foot there, and then with this one I just use some clippers and just snip that one off. So really easy to get off. And then there's that little bit of earth pile there which I don't want, so I just took my clippers and just snipped that away as well, and so got that out of the way, and then just trimmed it all up, leaving just the bits that have been painted, and that's going to stick directly onto the base in a second. Great, now we've got a miniature ready and our base all painted, and so I just get some Gorilla Glue, the super glue again, add it to the feet and the little bits of that twisted metal and every point that's going to make contact with the base, and I've already lined it up and tested it before I'm gluing it on, so I know exactly where I'm going to put it, and then I hold it down firmly just for a couple of seconds just so the glue can take, and then I just put a little bit of pressure on that foot there and just made sure it was flat. And this Gorilla Glue is really good. It's not too runny, so it doesn't spread everywhere, and you get a nice contact quite quickly. So there, it's already stuck, so I'll let that settle and then we'll have a look And here it is, all done. And I'll take some photos now, and then you can see it in a bit closer up and a bit detail and check it out. And here we go, our tabletop battle ready SLAUGHTERSHADE with Shadow Whip from the Khainite Shadowstalkers, all ready to play, and I was really happy with how it turned out. I'll put a list of all the paints I've used with links in the description below, and there'll be links to Element Games, and although they're affiliate links, they don't cost you anything extra. In fact, they'll save you money up to 20% with Element Games, and for every sale made through the affiliates, I get a small commission, and I can use that to develop the channel. So thanks so much for that support. I hope this video is helpful to you, and you're not going to win any prizes with this style of painting, but it's certainly going to get you some tabletop ready miniatures quite quickly, and my main goal with all this is to enjoy the process, have fun, and get them battle ready so we can get some cool games going on. Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you like it, subscribe for more videos like this, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to join me next time on Tabletop Skirmish Games.